All right. This week, ATF issued an open letter to all FFLs specifically applying the newest framer receiver rule to Polymer80, Lone Wolf, and other similar incomplete Glock-style pistol frames. This video will be a firearm attorney's analysis of what's going on with this letter, including my opinion and flaws that I see in this letter and the likely practical implications that this has for you. If you want to see similar content, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Well, without further ado, let's get stuck into it. There's something about the concept of an open letter that just triggers the hell out of me. I'll come right out and tell you this. I think this is a pretty aggressive abuse of the Bureau's power. For some backdrop, I'm sure most of y'all are aware that ATF cannot make new laws. I know that kind of sounds like a hilarious joke at this point, but it's still the state of the law that they're at least supposed to pretend to follow. Regulatory agencies are able to, consistent with the APA, interpret and create regulations that are consistent with the law, but they cannot add new stuff to existing law. As we've heavily discussed in my previous videos about the framer receiver rule, ATF did exactly that with the rule. They transformed a single sentence in the Gun Control Act into a multi-page, internally cross-referenced rule to put the status of incomplete receivers into question. The rule ATF is operating under here and referencing in this letter said that incomplete receivers would be regarded as firearms if they were significantly or sufficiently easy to complete. Of course, it gave us almost no guidance as to what was and was not sufficiently easy, but it did say that jigs, templates, and tooling included with the incomplete receiver would be relevant to its analysis. I'm sure most of y'all are very familiar with Polymer80 frames, which are Glock-style striker-fired frames that require the removal of material and the drilling of holes to complete into a functional firearm. Well, one of the few things ATF did intimate in its 2021 rulemaking was that 80% AR-15 lowers sold with a jig and tools and instructions were suspect, but that the 80% AR-15 lower on its own were likely fair game. After the rule took effect in August, we saw people selling 80% AR lowers as usual, and then we saw companies splitting up the Polymer80 style frames, where you'd buy the frame itself from one guy and the jigs and tools from another. In addition, Lone Wolf Distribution started selling the Freedom Wolf frame, which had voids for the provision of rails and other components. The customer would populate these voids and epoxy the frame together. Well, it was clear before that ATF really doesn't like Polymer80 or the concept of its product. But now it's hyper clear, and in fact, they're targeted by name. ATF published this open letter to all federal firearms licensees regarding the impact of that rule we discussed on Polymer80, Lone Wolf, and other similar incomplete pistol frames. Mind you, this isn't an administrative rulemaking or a new law. It's effectively a big public opinion letter. What ATF is doing here is wielding that incredibly long, unbelievably vague definition of readily that it used in the sentence defining a firearm frame as one which may readily be completed into a functional frame. Remember, that's not in the Gun Control Act, that's in ATF's regulation claiming to interpret a single sentence of the Gun Control Act. In this letter, ATF examines both the Polymer80 and the Lone Wolf, and ATF determines that even without any templates, jigs, or tools, that they are far too easy to complete. Now that might seem kind of confusing if you're a normal non-lizard American. After all, where in the law does it say anything about easy and what is not easy? Also, you might notice that the law specifically says the frame or receiver of a weapon. That is the only thing that can be considered a firearm, the frame or receiver of a weapon. So one might wonder, if a receiver was never complete, how could it have ever been a weapon? How could it have ever been a subpart of a weapon? Well, those are great questions. Questions I hope the answers to which slap the government in litigation down the road. For now, though, The logic the government put forth in this open letter was that the Polymer80 and similar could be completed by a person with novice skill using common tools such as a Dremel-type rotary tool within minutes. This, according to the government, is an amount of time and a set of circumstances that are far less than required to fall within the meaning of the term readily in the final rule. Now let's put this straight for everybody and do a little recap. The only area in the law that this is relevant to is the tiny phrase, or the framer or receiver of such a weapon. The ATF then tortured that sentence into a multi-paragraph regulation. And within that regulation, it included things that could be readily transformed into receivers. Of course, the ATF then inserted a page-long definition of readily, which has no goalposts, no markers of what is and is not readily. So now, and I stress this, the government is claiming that it is only operating within that single sentence of the law, and ATF is contending that whatever that line of readily is, that these frames are way on the regulable side of it, like way on one side of it. Again, they're citing that line, the location of which we have no idea because they never told us. ATF is saying that Polymer80 and similar frames are clearly on one side of it. Isn't that just something? So if it wasn't clear enough by now, I view this as a kind of double overstep on the part of the government. Administrative agencies can only interpret and clarify the law. They cannot stick new stuff in there. I don't think there's a way to interpret a single sentence into several pages without sticking stuff into the sentence. In my view, what ATF has done with the framer-receiver rule is what we call a legislative rulemaking, and it's a violation of both the Constitution and the Administrative Procedures Act. Quite specifically, it's a separation of powers problem. What this open letter does, all it does, is implement that legislative rulemaking from last year with regard to these specific products. So now you may be wondering, well, why hone in on these specific products? I say there's a simple answer there. The products are a victim of their own popularity. There's no doubt that Polymer80 frames were massively popular. So popular they showed up in the public conscience and even in traditional media. The government perceived this as like spitting into its eye, right? So it is taking retaliatory action by singling out these manufacturers. And I mean, Polymer80 is no stranger to this. They've been being singled out for years now. Just so happens they were the most popular. You'll also notice the letter is headlined to federal firearms licensees, but it addresses both FFLs and the general public. I think the strategy here is that ATF is attempting to, once again, exterminate a whole line of products using fear. By submitting this open letter to FFLs, those licensees are going to immediately remove these items from sale, take them off the shelves, or serialize them and sell them as normal, complete firearms. Furthermore, FFLs are a common source of information for the average gun buyer. This will thus create a zeitgeist in the gun community that you simply can't buy an incomplete pistol frame without going through an FFL. The government has been so intensely successful in creating such a reaction in the past, it's no wonder why they would choose to do it this way. It's because the gun community is an untrained beast that cannot be stopped from attempting to eat its own tail and hind legs at all times. Mere hours after this letter came out, for example, the community was ablaze with aggressive misinterpretations of that very letter, suggesting that all incomplete receivers were now banned, illegal, or some other such nonsense. That's not what this letter is even saying. It merely posits the government's position that incomplete striker-fired pistol frames like the Polymer80 and Freedom Wolf are complete firearms, even without the jigs, just on their own. It does not mean that you have to chop up any 80s that you already owned or made. It does not mean that you have to serialize all of those ones that you already have. It just means that it is going to be a lot harder to get a hold of these, and that businesses selling these are going to be in jeopardy if they're not doing it with a normal 4473 or FFL to FFL. What it does mean is industry members who have these in inventories are going to either serialize them consistent with the marking rule or just get rid of them. It also means that if you are prohibited from possessing a firearm, you probably shouldn't be caught with one of these in your paws. It also means you shouldn't ship them interstate. Most importantly, though, this does not mean that you cannot make your own handgun, as long as you live in the majority of US states, you know, as opposed to the bad ones, which we should probably give back to Canada at some point soon. Well, can is a powerful word here, so, you know. I will also stress that the final rule did nothing to prevent you from printing stuff at home, and I happen to have affiliate links to plastic spaghetti rolls if you're into that sort of thing. That's it for today, guys. As always, I super appreciate y'all watching and subscribing. If you want to support me more than that, I started up a Patreon and a Subscribe Star where I've got some pretty neat benefits for you, including a Discord, which I will warn you is a PvP-enabled zone. This kind of support will help me to make more content more regularly, which is what I really want to do. There's also a link to merch, including the Magic ATF ball, and affiliate links in the description below. And I really recommend our new, as the founders intended, AK-74 vending machine shirt. This is kind of a dream come true. I love it. There will be a link down there. There's stickers or whatever too. But anyway, thanks for watching. Y'all take care.